listening to the Kyle Mackey Podcast. Let's get this show started. Have you ever felt a tug-of-war between what feels good right now and what truly matters for your long-term fulfillment? Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the fascinating world of our brain's most powerful chemical messenger, dopamine. We'll be exploring insight from Dr. Anastasia Hronis' eye-opening book, The Dopamine Brain, which I have right here, which offers expert guidance on how this neurotransmitter steers our habits and shapes our lives. Dr. Hronis is a clinical psychologist and founder of the Australian Institute for Human Wellness, and her book is packed with neuroscience, psychology, and actionable advice to help us understand our own dopamine drive and for a more balanced life of purpose and pleasure. We'll break down her insights into three main sections, just like in the book, which is understanding the dopamine drive, balancing purpose and pleasure, and building behavioral control. So let's jump straight into this. Let's take a deeper dive into dopamine itself. And for those of you who are not quite sure what exactly dopamine is more than just a reward chemical. It's actually a chemical messenger crucial for communication within the brain and the nervous system. It has multiple key functions. Obviously, the one that most people are going to associate it with is that pleasure and reward. It influences when and how we experience feelings of pleasure and reward. It also has a lot to do with our overall motivation and pursuit. Crucially, dopamine also motivates us to seek out pleasurable things, not just experience them. It releases in anticipation of a reward. And so an example of this is the author's craving for sugar-coated donuts. It isn't just about eating them, but the drive to seek them out when passing the cafe. I think this is actually one thing that I didn't quite understand actually about dopamine before reading this book, is that it's not actually doing the action. It's the anticipation for the action that gets that dopamine flowing within, the brain. It also is the movement. It works with other neurotransmitters to control voluntary movements. Low levels are linked to conditions like Parkinson's disease. And learning and memory, it helps store memories and consolidate new ones, which is vital for guiding future behaviors, such as remembering that delicious pastry to seek it again, so the donuts, or whatever type of delicious treats you're into. It also has a very evolutionary significance. Dopamine was crucial for human survival in the prehistoric eras. It motivated behaviors like hunting and finding shelter and reproducing. It ultimately is something that does change, but it does have baseline levels. So everyone has a different baseline level of dopamine, influencing both genetic and life experiences. So the way I experience dopamine as somebody else is going to be different, and by different level amounts. Our experience of pleasure is relative to the baseline and what has come before. It also changes as time goes on too. So the more dopamine you get from certain things, it'll start to increase over time. And if you stop experiencing that pleasurable activity, slowly that baseline will start to drop back down. In the book, it goes over quite a few different myths about dopamine. We all have this general understanding, which a lot of those things are not actually true. So in the book, she goes over a bunch of common misconceptions that are oversimplified by social media. I'm not going to go over all these different myths, but we're going to just go over about 4 of them right now. If you obviously want to read the book and read the whole list, I think there's maybe like 8 or 10 or 12. There's quite a few different myths that she goes over and tries to debunk. But the first myth is that you can detox from dopamine. I think there's a lot of stuff on social media about people taking these dopamine detoxes, and the general premise of it is that it's actually false. Dopamine is naturally occurring and essential for basic bodily function, like motor controls, motivation, arousal, memory, sleep, and executing functioning. A true detox from dopamine would mean you wouldn't be able to survive. The popular dopamine detox refers to avoiding behaviors that excessively activate dopamine pathways, not eliminating dopamine itself. I think before reading this book, I didn't realize how essential dopamine was to the overall body. So when people say, oh, I'm going to do a dopamine detox, it just is not possible. Our brain is constantly making dopamine. And even if it means you're not going to do those certain actions that get the dopamine triggering, the dopamine is still going to be there. It's more so you're trying to bring that baseline back down a little bit lower by avoiding those activities for that short period of time. Another myth is that you can become addicted to dopamine, and you actually can't become addicted to the molecule itself. What people become addicted to is the activities and the substances that cause a dopamine release. The brain becomes conditioned to seek more intense experiences for that same level of excitement, leading to tolerance. So it's not that you're addicted to the dopamine. If it's, say, you're into let's go social media, let's go gambling, it's that high of getting, the anticipation that you might win or that you might lose. And it causes people to bet bigger and bigger and bigger. Could be pornography as well. You start off with just very basic pornography, and then you try to get a bigger rush of dopamine. So it's like it's pushing you to watch deeper and darker stuff. But yeah, you don't actually get addicted to the dopamine. You get addicted to the activity that helps release that dopamine in anticipation. The next myth is going to be the more dopamine you have, the happier you are. And again, that's not exactly the case. Continuous surges of dopamine lead to tolerance, meaning that the same stimulation will no longer produce the same pleasure. The brain seeks homeostasis, internal balance, and it reduces natural dopamine production to compensate for the overstimulation. And that's why the more you do these activities that release this dopamine, the more and more and more you want of it, because the baseline will continue to rise, but there's always going to be that level of homeostasis, which it says. So the more you get of it, it's not going to, because it's just never going to keep on increasing. It's going to bring your baseline back level, and you're going to just try to seek, again, increased dopamine. And then the last myth that we're going to go over is a 24-hour detox resets the dopamine levels. And this is definitely false. It takes a lot more time than this to help bring that dopamine baseline back down. Dopamine regulation is quite complex, and it doesn't reset in such a short period. The brief abstinence is more about experienced discomfort and building internal behavior control, but it's not long enough for lasting change. Later in this podcast, we'll go over the time frames you sort of need to use in order to get it down to where it's completely reduced. But 24 hours is by far not long enough. Definitely probably enough to feel some discomfort for certain potentially addictions or things that we use to release dopamine on a regular basis, but it definitely takes much longer than that. So what can disrupt our dopamine? So obviously in modern life, we have tons of overstimulation. Our life sort of acts like a Disneyland for our brain, with constant stimulation from delicious treats, from games, social media, the endless scrolling on Instagram, when you go into a store, you have desserts absolutely everywhere. When you go into a cafe and, ooh, those cabinets, they just look so good. I have a hard time going into a cafe with not, just being lit up by like all the delicious treats there. On our phones, we have all the mind-numbing games that we can download and play, but then we also have our systems and everything. So there's so many things just all around us that are just overstimulating our brain. And then there's the tolerance that comes from it. So repeated exposure to high dopamine releasing activity causes the brain to adapt by reducing its natural dopamine production, and experiences that once brought pleasure become necessary just to feel normal. And you hear about this in addiction all the time, where people they start off just experiencing the drugs or the pornography or whatever it is, that the gambling, it starts off at a low level and it just keeps getting heightened and heightened and heightened. And it's because that dopamine baseline just keeps dropping and dropping and dropping. And in order to have that release, you need to push further and further and further. So it's good to try to bring that base level back down, so that way we're not just keep on pushing to these extreme levels to experience that same level of dopamine. You're not experiencing more dopamine. It's just that your baseline is rising, which means it pushes you to push yourself even further. There's many components of addiction. While this book isn't an addiction recovery guide, understanding the spectrum is key. And there's Mark Griffith to model highlights different things with this. So there's salience, which is the activity becomes central to a person's life. There's mood modification, so it alters the mood. It gives you a buzz. It gives you an escape. There's the tolerance, so needing more to achieve that desired feeling. Withdrawal, the unpleasant feelings, the physical reactions from abstaining, which lead to cravings. Then there's that conflict, the internal and external issues due to the behavior. And relapse, the tendency to revert to the previous patterns. So these are the components of addiction that, have to do with dopamine and why it sort of keeps going through that cycle. And there's a bunch of problematic behaviors that associate with that dopamine pull. So some of those examples are alcohol. Increased dopamine release contributes to compulsively seeking more. So, when you first start drinking, a couple beers gets you to that feeling of nice buzz. But then as you drink for longer and longer, a couple years in, it's like, now I'm drinking a whole 12-pack. A couple months, years later, maybe I'm drinking a whole 24-pack to still get that same level of excitement. Same thing with drugs. Stimulants like cocaine, amphetamines, opioids, they artificially stimulate dopamine and disrupt our natural cycles, leading to high addictiveness. And it's why it's really hard to get off these, because it's artificially stimulating that dopamine. Then we have social media, which is designed to be sticky through intermittent reinforcements. So they're actually designing these apps to release more dopamine, which ultimately wants us to get more and more. So unpredictable rewards like the likes and notifications, these anticipation drives continuous checking, and the effortless scrolling removes active choice. So, when social media first came out, you get to the bottom, it's like, would you like to load more? Yeah. Now it's just like, nope, it just keeps going and going and going and going. And I find this like the absolute worst with the shorts, because it's like, honestly, they never end. I'm going to go into one of the tools that I personally use to try to minimize this stuff later on. But I don't have the ability to even watch shorts on my phone, because I just feel like once you get into it, it's just like a nonstop. It's like no way out of it. Then there's gambling. Dopamine surges from wins and near misses. The brain perceives partial rewards, driving further play. And it also uses intermittent reinforcement. Rapid play increases addictiveness. So I did have quite a bit of gambling in my earlier 20s. Thankfully, it's not something I really do much anymore. But I will say it's like when you're really close or when you need that win, when it's like when you're just playing with a few dollars here or there and it's nothing that, but when you start upping the stakes, like the rush that it's giving you is pretty wild. And so it makes sense that it's when you get really close to those wins or when you get those wins and those near misses where you're feeling the largest surges. And then there's the online shopping. Anticipation and purchases create dopamine spikes. Unexpected rewards and gamification features like points or quizzes intensify the allure. I believe this is one of the reasons why we have new online stores like from the Chinese, like I forget. There's Shein, which is like a clothing one, and I was watching a video about it the other day. Temu, they like gamify the experience, so it's makes it even more dopamine releasing, which means you want to go back and buy more and more and more to try to get all these extra bonuses and stuff. Like they have like this little wheel spin. I think I've only bought off Temu once. So I don't really know it all too well, but I understand the gamification of it, and it's again to increase those dopamine spikes, so that way you want to come back and play some more, buy some more if they make more money. And then lastly, video games. So in-game rewards, the social elements, the immersive narratives create a sense of accomplishment and escapism, which drive that continuous play. I used to play like this game like Two Dots, which there was all these like in-game rewards and stuff like that. And, you'd have to go back every day to get those sort of awards. Or like same thing with like Pokemon Go. That's a huge one. There's a bunch of like in-game rewards you can get it. And, the anticipation of catching, like the rare Pokemon or battle for like Mewtwo popping up, they make you wanting to keep on going up. But it's that dopamine that it helps release when you're in that anticipation type mode that drives that continuous play. Now that we have a basic understanding of dopamine in itself, the next thing that this book goes into is balancing purpose and pleasure. And there's a conflict of pleasure and purpose. And so when it comes to dopamine, that's the pleasure. It's like trying to release that as much as we want, but without purpose, it sometimes just doesn't give us the feeling that we're actually searching for. So Dr. Hronis emphasizes that constant indulgence in dopamine-driven activities, while pleasurable in the short term, leads to a shallow, superficial happiness. There's two types of happiness that it goes over. So there's hedonic happiness and there's eudaimonic. Sorry if my pronunciation there was not great, but hedonic happiness is derived from the immediate pleasure and avoidance of pain. So such as eating those donuts, which, in the early example with Dr. Hronis going into the cafe and always wanting that sugary donut, or like watching Netflix and binge watching it, keep on going and going and going, versus eudaimonic happiness, which is derived from meaningful endeavors and living a life of purpose. Ultimately, eudaimonic happiness will lead to a happier and more fulfilling life in the long run. But hedonic happiness, it will scratch that itch right now. And so there's definitely times where it's good to have some hedonic happiness. But if that's all you're going for, it's just ultimately in the end going to leave you very unhappy with where your life's actually at. So it's about balancing the two. You want hedonic with eudaimonic. And when you balance the two in proper equilibrium, that's where you will have a more happy, fulfilling life in general. So the goal is not to eliminate pleasure, but to find a sweet spot of equilibrium where pleasurable activities are balanced with a full, enriching, and meaningful life. An example of this is an investment analyst. His name was Gary, and he achieved hedonic happiness through wealth and status, but he ultimately felt extremely lonely and lacked purpose. But where he eventually found balance was by re-engaging with his cultural community So using, the money and that he got from his work to actually improve the community. And then he felt like he had a purpose more than just make money, make wealth, make status. But then on the opposite end of that, we had Sandra, who is a social worker, and she found great eudaimonic happiness in her work, but she was always burnt out and lacked leisure. She balanced this by rediscovering purely pleasurable hobbies like art and comedy and mixing it into the work that she does. So again, if you only have one or the other, you probably won't feel completely fulfilled. I would say you probably want to lean more in the direction of Sandra, where it's more eudaimonic happiness. But again, you still need those moments of hedonic pleasure to get that full encompass happiness that we're sort of looking for. So there's that personal balance. The balance between pleasure and purpose is individual. There is no right or wrong amount for everyone. But again, you do need to have both. Again, it's probably better to have more of that eudaimonic happiness. But again, if you have no hedonic happiness, again, at a certain point, like Sandra did, you'll start to feel burnt out and feel like you're lacking something as well. So then after this, it goes into actually figuring out what your values are and why they are important. Because if you don't understand these, it's really hard to actually sort of search for that eudaimonic happiness, which means you're always going to be searching for that hedonic happiness. And so values are deeply held beliefs about what is important and meaningful to us. They act as our guiding principles, influence our activities, our attitudes, our thoughts, our behaviors, and they're like a compass guiding our journey. They have impact on our lives. So values help us make major life decisions, such as careers, relationships, locations that we want to be in, and influence our relationships with others and our overall well-being. Living in alignment with our values leads to a higher sense of overall well-being. Now, values are different than goals. So values are not goals. They don't have an endpoint. Health is a value. Going to the gym 5 times a week is a goal. Values help us make meaningful goals. And so the connection to dopamine is that the pursuit of uninhibited short-term dopamine hits can easily pull us away from engaging in activities aligned with our core values and leading to ultimate dissatisfaction. So in the book, there's a lot of different tools and suggested exercises on how to identify your values. But I actually have a workbook that I created quite a few years ago. I've redone it. New artwork. Looks a lot more clean and professional. And you can actually get it for free. It'll be in the show notes. So it's a journal I created called A Journey Towards Clarity. And it essentially has a lot of exercises which will do everything that you have in this book here, but it's all there in a nice workbook format. So whether you do pick up this book, The Dopamine Brain, or you just want this free workbook to help you identify what your values are, just know that that resource is there for you for free. You can click on the link that will be in the show notes and download a PDF copy of it, print it out, use it on a tablet where you can fill it in. But if you don't know what your values are, it's really important for pretty much everything in life to know what they are, to figure out what your purpose are. And so that workbook, which I've created, again, completely free for anybody to download and use, will help you in this process. But if you want to go through Dr. Hronis's suggestions, number one thing is to work through brainstorming. So she suggests thinking about what's important, what's meaningful, or what's passionate to you. What topics get your heart racing? When are you so absorbed you lose track of time? What qualities do you value in others and yourselves? And what moments make you proudest? She suggests review a list of values, but you can also see this in the workbook that I've provided as well. There's a pretty comprehensive list. But use the list to help identify values you might have not considered. So you're going to have something that just like pop off the top of your brain. For me, like time is one of the things that I value the most. I always appreciate when people are, respectful of the time, always there on time. I try to make the most of the time that I have. But when I go through the list, I'll be like, oh, that one looks something that's quite important to me. And the more I think about it, it's like, yeah, that's definitely one that, means a lot to me. And sometimes it's like you sort of know it does, but until you actually see a word for it, it's like, I never really actually thought of that. So maybe it's like security. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's having like all your friends and family around all the time, or just family in general. There's a variety of different values you could have, but just sort of being able to see the different ones out there sometimes helps just trigger the ones that mean the most for you. Another exercise that I actually have in the workbook, which I think is important, is imagining yourself like as if you're like 80 years old and reflecting on your life. What would you want to think about yourself? How would you want to have treated others? What would you have liked to achieve? This will often help you reveal your longer term, more fundamental values. But ultimately, in the end, whatever the exercise you choose, whether it's from the workbook, whether it's from the Dopamine Brain, you want to narrow down your values. In the book, there's an example of one person who's like, he sees the big list, there's like 50 or 100 different values on it. He's like, these all apply to me. And Dr. Hronis is just like, they might all apply to you, but if you want to apply them all, you're not going to have that focus to actually live a life that's in line with your values. It's just going to be all over the place. So it's good to have a more focused view on what is important to you, what are the most important. So like in the workbook, I have it so you list about like 15 and then we bring it down to like the top 5. And it's good to have those top 5s. You know what also is important to you, but what are the top 5 to 10 core non-negotiable values? And because focusing on too many may become overwhelming and ultimately will be unproductive. So again, you can use the workbook I've provided. You can also pick up the book itself, The Dopamine Brain, and use whichever ones work for you. But again, getting a better understanding of what your values actually are is going to help you in getting out of this trap of what dopamine is driving you to do. Because again, you want to try to get those eudaimonic happiness as well. And values are key to being able to do that. Because if not, you're just going to keep on going for those hedonic quick pleasures. So where do values actually come from? Our values are influenced by family, friends, society, and culture. It is important to ensure they are truly your authentic values and not just internalized from others. So sometimes people will like try to keep pushing, especially like family and stuff like that. They'll sometimes make you feel like something is important to you because it was important to them. So if your family values family, it's not necessarily that you do as well. There's a good chance, if you were brought up in a family where it's, family first for everything, but maybe it doesn't actually resonate with you. So taking a moment to think, is this something that I want, or is this something that, my family wants for me? So an example from the book is a lady by the name of Belinda. She's an investment banker. She realizes her values around extreme hard work and success were inherited from the hustle culture and her family, not truly her own, which ultimately led to burnout. And actually, I think this is quite common that you have a family that wants you to become like a doctor or an accountant or an engineer. And it's like, those don't really align with who I am. They're not what I want. Maybe you're a very creative person, and these are just things that your family thinks would be good for your economic future, your security, your stability, but maybe those aren't important to you. Maybe you don't really care about that security. You don't care about the economics that would come in with it. You just want to be able to express yourself fully. And so if that's the case, then obviously you need to acknowledge what is important to you and start making goals aligned with those values, which will allow that creativity or whatever else is around it. Finances actually change as well. So I know when I was younger, money was a much bigger driver for me. It's something I valued a lot more. And now it's not something. I think I do value creativity and being able to express myself a lot more. And so what might have been meaningful value when you were younger could be different now and will probably be different in the future as well. Cultural upbringings, religion, and social groups also play a significant role in our values. And also understanding the origin of your values contributes to your personal identity. So again, I highly recommend, if you don't know what your values are, at the bare minimum, download the free workbook that I have in the show notes, or pick up the Dopamine Brain, or whatever tool feels best for you. There's so many different options out there for uncovering what your values are. But again, when you understand what is important to you, it's going to allow you to live a happier and more fulfilling life by not simply making decisions for that hedonic happiness, but getting that eudaimonic happiness as well. Now, once you have a good understanding of why you're searching for these different things, in order to get rid of those behaviors that are causing those dopamine spikes, there's a lot of different things that we can do to change our day-to-day life and change those specific behaviors or uses of substances or tools or whatever it is, so that way we can have that more balanced happiness. So identifying your target behavior. To make practical changes, Dr. Hronis suggests choosing one specific behavior or substance with which you want to change your relationship. This isn't necessarily about quitting forever, but about regaining control and shifting your power dynamic. And there might be more than one thing that you want to change, but trying to change everything at once could be quite a struggle. So start off with one specific behavior or substance that you want to change your relationship with. Once you've mastered one, move on to the next. Once you've mastered the other one, move on to the next. But if you try to do everything at once, it's going to be quite a difficult struggle. So choose that one that feels most unaligned with who you are and work with that one first. And so different ways in which you can deal with this. Starting off, you need to take a break. And I will say it's much harder said than done for certain things that are not hugely influential in that dopamine release. A break might be all you need. But for certain things, it's going to take some steps further than that. So we'll start with just the concept of taking a break from this. Ultimately, nothing changes if nothing changes. To see a different outcome, you must act differently. The purpose of a break is abstaining from a target behavior, allowing the brain to readjust its baseline dopamine levels and sensitivity. So it's about bringing it down to a place where it doesn't impact you or make you have those cravings as intensely, so you can go about with your daily life and, in search and pursuit of more of those eudaimonic happiness things, the things that are going to make you fulfilled in the long run. But when you bring that baseline back down to a level that is more appropriate, it's going to mean that it's not going to be over-consuming your mind all the time and driving you to make these decisions that'll only make you happy in the moment, but will be very short-lived. Treat this as an experiment. So approach this abstinence with curiosity. Try to collect data on how you feel and what changes when you stop the behavior. So it's good to note the good and the bad, not just one or the other, but look at what it's doing for your life. If all you're seeing is amazing outcomes from cutting these certain habits, actually having note and reference of that is going to be a lot easier to stick with. But if you don't actually take the time to see how it's impacting your life, then when you have these urges again in the future, you're like, it hasn't really done much for me. But if you take note of it, so let's say you give up gambling. When you give up gambling, it means that you're not spending all this time doing an activity that's making you unhappy, that's hurting your economic future, which is allowing you to spend more time with your friends and your family, and it's giving you these feelings that align more with your values, because maybe friends and family is one of your values. Then you'll be like, when you have these urges in the future, be like, maybe I don't need gambling. Maybe I just need to go spend time with my family. Maybe I just need to go spend time with my friends. And that might be a better future for you. So try to gain as much knowledge about yourself from this break that you're taking. Now, the duration of which this break should be, which I spoke about earlier, can vary depending on the level of problem, how problematic the habit actually is, whether it's just something that impacts your life on a small scale or whether it's severely addictive. So generally speaking, Dr. Hronis recommends starting from a minimum of around 2 to 4 weeks. I've read many places that in order to build new habits, you need at least 21 days. So I would say, 3 weeks is a very minimum. But depending on what it is, that might not even be close enough. So for serious addictions, a minimum of 90 days of abstinence without release is often recommended for brain resetting. But again, choosing something that is appropriate for the level of addiction or for the level of dopamine release is what's going to have you have the best success. I would say 90 days is definitely better. I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast has set themselves a goal, maybe a New Year's resolution, and made it happen for 21 days and reset. But again, once you get to somewhere like 90 days, it's very unlikely that you're going to reset back into those old ways, especially to the same extent. You might have some little slip-ups here and there, but it probably won't ever get back to that same level of intensity. And then there's the incubation of craving. So be aware that the cravings can intensify in the weeks and months following the initial abstinence, known as incubation. This highlights that taking a break is often just the beginning of the deeper work. So again, this is just the start of it. You're going to have little setbacks here and there, but start with at least that minimum of 2 to 4 weeks, ideally longer if you can do it. 90 days is a great amount of time. I know myself, about 2 years ago, tried to really reduce some of these things that I just felt were not good for my life. So social media, gave up porn, and all these things I tried to cut out for, I think it was 100 days is what I chose at the time. And most of these things now I don't even, haven't watched porn over 2 years. Social media I haven't had on my phone. So unless it's on my computer, don't watch it. YouTube's probably been the one that's been the biggest struggle because I really like YouTube. I generally like watching more informative type videos, but I actually have it blocked on my phone as well because I just find when I get trapped into the shorts, again, that dopamine release just wants me on going back and back. But trying to remove these things, I would say if I would have just said 2 or 4 weeks, it wouldn't have worked. But since I set that threshold at 90 days, I've had a lot more success with it all. So again, I would say push for that longer period of time. You're probably going to have better results with it. I don't think just 2 to 4 weeks, especially if it's something that, you've been doing for an extremely long time, it's going to necessarily work. The next thing that Dr. Hronis goes over is sitting with the discomfort. And sometimes this can probably be the most challenging part. It's you have an activity. So we use social media as it because I know everybody uses social media and I'm sure everybody could agree they could probably cut back on it a little bit. But when you're so used to just mindlessly scrolling, when you stop that mindlessly scrolling and you're just having to sit with not scrolling, like, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's like, what do I do with my thumb? What do I do to fidget? What do I do to just keep my mind active? But there's nothing wrong with just sitting there and experiencing the discomfort that you're going through. But our innate inclination is to avoid unpleasant feelings, but growth happens when we lean into this discomfort. So what it means is allowing yourself to feel unpleasant emotions, sensations, or urges, such as sadness, anger, anxiety, those cravings, without pushing them away or distracting yourself. So again, you don't need to constantly have something to distract you. Sometimes distractions are important, and it's actually going to be one of the tools to sort of overcome giving up these dopamine releasing activities. But in general, it's important to be able to sit with what you're actually going through and understand those feelings and understand what it's causing internally. So having that introspective awareness, the ability to notice internal sensations, so whether your heart rate is increasing, whether you're having these urges, whether it's giving you emotional sensations, this awareness is crucial for emotional regulation. And emotions are information. All emotions, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, serve as a function which provide data about ourselves and our environments. Fear signals danger. Anger signals injustice. Sadness signals loss. Guilt signals more moral conflict. So when you're feeling these different emotions, one of the suggestions is being able to name it, to tame it. So labeling an emotion as it happens activates the prefrontal cortex, which helps us to reduce its intensity. If not, I believe it's in the amygdala, is where it's just going to keep intensifying it. But the moment that you name it, it brings it to a different part of the brain, which allows it to reduce its intensity. So if you're, on that social media detox and you're having these urges, what is it making you feel? Tell yourself what it's making you feel. And then it takes it from a different part of the brain, which allows you to sit with it a little bit more. Allows you to sit with that discomfort. The next element of this is the mindfulness. And I know mindfulness is a very trendy word that is used in a variety of different things. But by having mindfulness, by being able to ride the wave, you're going to have much more success with this. So mindfulness is a key skill for sitting with discomfort. It's about being fully aware of the present moment, but not judgmentally. It's about emptying the mind. It's not about emptying the mind or always feeling calm. It's just allowing yourself to be fully aware and present in that moment. Again, we so often just try to send our minds into different directions so that we don't just feel what we feel. But by just feeling what we feel and acknowledging it and not judging ourselves for having these feelings, it will put us into that state of mindfulness. So to practice this, use your senses to observe something external, such as, picking up an object. Got like the book in my hand. And then apply it to these same observational curiosity to internal sensations, feelings, and urges. So it's like, this book is smooth. It's bright. It's hard. But then sort of giving these same sort of sensations to the feelings that we're having, like if you're sad, or if you're feeling like anxious, it's like, it's making my heart race. It's making my hands sweat. It's making my breath deeper. Having a chance to observe what is actually happening, the changes that are happening within your body. And remember that these urges and emotions are temporary. They're like the wave, which rises peaks and recedes. Your job is to ride the wave without struggling, fighting, or trying to hold on to them. It's not about just trying to stay at the peak. It's not just trying to stay at the base. It's about going up and down, acknowledging the journey, acknowledging the tough parts and the easy parts, the things that make you feel most uncomfortable, the things that make you feel the best, and trying to transition smoothly through it all. Now, I'm not going to lie. When I first read this book and I read this Riding the Wave, to myself, I was thinking like, this is much easier said than done. It's not an easy thing to do. You're going to have tremendous difficulties if this is the only thing that you do to implement it, especially on things that have impacted your life for a long period of time. So over my years, I've had things that I've struggled with. I struggled with gambling in my early years. As I said, I feel like social media, pornography, those things a couple years ago really consumed a lot of my time. And these things were not easy to necessarily overcome. But by coming up with additional strategies, and one that I'll talk about in this next little list, we'll go through the ones that Anastasia Hronis suggests first, and then we'll continue with it. But by having additional strategies more than just mindfulness is great. And again, if you can just get it all with this, perfect. That's amazing. But I do think you need more, especially when stuff are such a big part of your life. And so having one or two or three of these additional strategies will help you overcome what dopamine is making you want to do. Again, you can overcome what dopamine is doing to you, but having tools to do so, more so than just mindfulness, will lead to much greater success, in my personal opinion. Again, I'm not a psychologist. I know she's clearly way more educated than I am, but just from my own personal experience, you do need a variety of tools to have the success that you're looking for when overcoming what dopamine does to us on a daily basis. So when you can't ride the wave, these are some additional strategies in which you can use. When urges are overwhelming or you lack the mental capability, short-term strategies can act as a circuit breaker. One of the suggestions is distractions. And I sort of mentioned this a little bit above. But having a helpful short-term tool, but avoiding excessive use, can become an unhealthy avoidance pattern. So you want to have distractions, but you just don't want to use it all the time. Some examples of these, which are not, in my opinion, very negative distractions. I also don't know how much they're going to want to make you do them. But again, if it can just get your mind off what you were initially thinking of, that's all you're trying to do here. So she suggests some mental games such as alphabet categories. So I know back in the day, if you ever did like categories when you're playing, what is it? King's Cup? I don't know. I can't remember. Some drinking games back in university where you would like list off the categories. It'd be like for the alphabet A to Z, give like a country that starts with each letter, or give a type of cereal or car, an animal. Go through things like that. So it's like, oh, I got this craving right now. Let's just do this alphabet game. Apple, banana, carrot. I'm going fruits and vegetables for this right now. Durian, and then so on and so on. Or you could do like arithmetic, like a little math problem where it's like choose a number and then add 3 to it. 5, 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 23, and just keep going. Or pulling out like a book or a piece of paper and just counting a specific letter on it. Don't read the words, just look for the letters. If it's like E, how many E's are there on this page? It's just about taking your brain somewhere else, off from what your brain is craving for that dopamine release. I would say these are better than, replacing it with something else. Like if you're somebody who is a big drinker and you replace that drinking with eating food as your distraction, well, you're just replacing one bad habit with potentially another bad habit. But replacing it with a mental game, which is just a little distraction, I think is a much better approach to go. Then we have sensory strategies, so things that are self-soothing, such as gentle, calming experiences that activate the parasympathetic nervous system, so dimming the lighting, putting on calming music, taking a warm bath or shower, wrapping yourself in soft fabric, aromatherapy, warm drinks, dark chocolate, or intense sensations like shock the system to break an urge with a cold shower and ice bath, strong flavors like wasabi, ginger, sour candy, vigorous exercise. For me, I feel like, not that I've tried many of these as far as to break a overwhelming dopamine crave, I feel like the intense ones would probably work better. But I'm sure for every different person, these all work differently. I can just imagine, honestly, this would be horrible. And if every single time I had an urge for something that was going to give a dopamine release, I had to put wasabi. Like, I actually love spicy, but I just think wasabi tastes horrible. And if every time I was trying to break myself from doing something that releases this dopamine, whether, again, it's gambling, social media, pornography, whatever it was, I was like, I'm going to just take a little hit of wasabi. Oh my God. That probably would make me never want to partake in those activities ever again. I will say at the same time, you have to have that mental fortitude to actually push yourself to do these intense sensations. But if every time you do, it causes you from stopping to do this. In an example of this, actually, there's a guy, one of our clients, he would go to like brothels and stuff like that after like dates and stuff like that if the date wasn't successful in his mind, which for him it was whether they come home with him. But he hated it because it made him feel horrible. So ultimately it didn't align with him too. He wanted to have a loving relationship, but it's like if he wasn't going to get that, he had that quick fix of going to a brothel. But his end of solution was having like these little like hot sauce packets ready to go. And the moment that he'd have the hot sauce packet, it would just like, obviously it's like a burning sensation. I don't know if he likes hot sauce or whatnot, but it actually broke the intensity for him to want to go for these other urges, which allowed him to go home and make the better decision for him, which will lead to more of that eudaimonic happiness that align more with his values, not the hedonic happiness. So whatever it is for you, those are just some other options. Consequential thinking, so preparing a list of all the negative outcomes of engaging in that behavior and the positive outcomes of resisting it. This provides realistic reminders and inner strengths. Of these ones, I actually think this one is one of the better ones that she provides. Again, in all these, there is that little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? But you need to have that resilience, that perseverance to push through. But when you have something that is actually negatively impacting your life, so like the reason I gave up pornography is my ex, she was one who sort of suggested it. And after I broke up, that's when I stopped. But realizing that, it can impact a relationship makes me realize, in future relationships, I don't want the same problem. So give it up because it will lead to a better future relationship. So think of the problems it might have caused and what it might help out in the future. And by having those lists there and being able to reflect on it, so both the negatives and the positives will be giving you, it makes you want to persevere and continue to push on. It's like, I don't want this to impact my future. And this is what it's caused in the past, all these different problems. So let's cut this out and we're going to have a much better future. And having those positives and the negatives right there, having it ready to go on your, phone, having it, let's actually go with like food cravings. Cause I actually sort of did this as well when I was a kid, when I had goals of, when I used to be a competitive runner, I knew that every extra pound I gained, this is not necessarily a healthy thing to think of as a kid, but I knew every extra pound I gained would negatively impact my running. So I'd put inside the cabinets with all the junk food, all the negative impacts if I were to eat that food. So I open the door and it's like, if you eat this, you're not going to run as fast. If you do this, you might not get your scholarship. If you do this, you're not going to make it to nationals. And when it's like, damn, I don't want that future. I want to go to nationals. I want that scholarship. I don't want to gain that extra pound because I don't want it to impact my times. It was much easier just to shut the door and not actually eat those delicious food, even though my mind really wanted that sugary hit. Now, if I can suggest a tool that is not part of this book, but I actually think is one of the best tools you can use when it's technologically linked. So this would be with potentially if you do online gambling, pornography, social media, anything where it's like on your phone. You can also come up with solutions for blocking things that are not on your phone. But for specifically things on your phone, blockers and like parental controls, they are such helpful tools. You don't even need to go the parental controls route anymore. There's actually some really good apps for this, such as App Block. That's one that I use, which essentially means when I'm at home, I don't touch social media. I have it completely blocked. There's no YouTube on my phone. There's no Instagram. There's no Facebook. If I'm outside the house and I need to take a little glance at something, that's cool. If I'm going to an event and I need to look at Facebook, awesome. If I really need something, I can hop on my computer too and I can search it, but it has to be more mindful that I'm going there for a specific reason rather than just mind-numbingly scrolling through for that dopamine hit. But these app blocks, especially when you're going through that first 100-day phase, it's such a helpful tool to have. Because again, I think as much as we can look at a list of the positive and negatives by cutting out an activity, we can have these sensory strategies, we can have these distractions. Just having a hard block, which gets it out of our system, is great. Like, I've had it without the app block on at times too, and I don't really have the desire to go back to it anymore because I used it for those first 100 days. But, sometimes, again, you do slip up. You just get lost in it, and that's why I choose to just keep these on there. I don't need to. But it just controls it a little bit more, and it means that when you do go onto the computer to take an action, you're doing it more mindfully. Because again, sometimes it's just in that moment, that urge. But if you can just get past it, it settles, and then you don't think to go on for, gambling or porn or social media or whatever it is for you that causes issue. If you can block it at the source with a tool such as app blockers, I think that's a great tool to have in your repertoire. So again, it depends on what it is. If it's alcohol, an app block isn't going to work potentially. But what you could do is obviously get it out of the house. Don't have alcohol in there. That helps a lot. Same thing with food, getting it out of the house. I try personally when it comes to food to always have dessert outside the house. So that way, if I want something sweet, I have a single serving. I don't have a whole box of cookies. I think that's the better approach to have. Same thing with alcohol. If you always crave alcohol, don't have it in your house. If you're out with friends and you want to drink, cool. But if it's like every time I come home from work, I have a drink and then I have another drink and I have another drink, well, just don't bring it into your house. It's going to make it much easier to avoid those cravings. So setting yourself up with an environment that allows you to not seek these dopamine hits, it's going to lead to a much better success. So that's the one thing in the book that's not there that I think will help a lot, having in these strategies which make it harder to fulfill these dopamine hits. And with these app blocks too, they've improved a lot. I used to use parental controls just because it was an easier way to block things without being able to unblock it. But now the app blocks are so good that you can literally, I have it so it's just like a 500-meter radius around my house. So if I need to do anything, just head up down the road, unblock it. I come back and fix it, do something else if I needed to. but it doesn't actually negatively impact your life in any way. It actually makes it just so much better. So look at those as tools. Then once you have sort of learned how to work with mindfulness and ride the wave, and having those additional strategies when you can't ride the wave, you need to build the new. And so as you take a break from these old habits, it's crucial to replace them with value-guided active actions and goals. So building the new for myself, I've tried to replace a lot of these bad habits with better ones. I've been reading a whole lot more. Exercise is a big part too. So like I'm always training for something. A couple of years ago I was training for around Taupo. We have a 160K kilometer bike race. Now I'm training for a 100-kilometer ultra marathon. So having something that fills that gap, fills that void. Now that I'm not scrolling so much on YouTube shorts and Instagram reels and stuff like that, picking up a book and actually reading. I don't just watch YouTube on my phone. It's either I'm taking that set approach to sit at the couch and actually watch something I want to watch, or, I'll pick up a book and actually read. So now I've been reading about a book every 2 weeks, which is pretty awesome. Being proactive versus just a place filler. So proactive goals, structured and planned, weekly guitar lessons for creativity, where a place filler is flexible, quick access, actions aligned with values of immediate urges, calling family for connection instead of scrolling, practicing guitar for creativity. So having a mixture of the two, planned versus something that if you just need something in that moment to stop yourself from going there, it's great to have. And then daily reflections, consolidating progress by asking, what am I proud of today? What was value aligned? What can I do tomorrow? So possibly doing like a nighttime journal, like a 5-minute journal. 5-minute journal is pretty good for that, and it gives you opportunity to throw in, a couple extra points. So you can look at that for a daily reflection. And the last thing in building the new, which I think is harder said than done, and I'm actually going to try to find a book that hopefully we can discuss in the coming weeks or months, is on self-compassion. I think this is a really important tool that if you can start working into your life, it will make it easier when you do have these slip-ups. So you need to treat yourself with kindness and understanding, especially during setbacks. This prevents self-criticism, which can lead back to old habits. Self-compassion comprises self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Sometimes we beat ourselves up when, we have these minor setbacks. But again, it's just a minor setback. If you're not getting fully, like if you're an alcoholic and you give up alcohol, and for a year and a half, you don't have a single drink, and then one day you have one, but you beat yourself up about it so much that you start drinking all the time, you're just setting yourself back up to the exact same place you were. But if you have that one drink, you're like, oh, I messed up, but I did great. I did a year and a half without this. Let's try to go for 2 years now. Great. It was just one drink. It didn't ruin everything. You still had that year and a half of progress. Now you continue on. Acknowledge it, sit with it, acknowledge why you might have had that feeling, come up with a plan to make sure this doesn't happen again, but don't beat yourself up for it. Be like, great job for what you did do to get here. You tried so hard. You succeeded so much. Now let's do this again. Let's work on this again. Let's make this another success. So that's something that we're going to discuss in the coming weeks. I really want to do an episode on self-compassion. I think it's one of the things that I've been really hard on myself too. I set myself a lot of goals, and when I find that I'm taking a step back and not truly working for it, sometimes I beat myself up a little bit. It's something I could definitely work on, and I think a ton of other people could work on the same thing. So in the coming weeks, we'll definitely dig a little bit deeper into this. So overall, I hope you were able to gain a lot from today's episode. But just to sum it all up, what we've explored is essentially how dopamine, which is a powerful neurotransmitter, influences our behavior, drives our pursuit of pleasure, and can lead to problematic habits if left unchecked. We've debunked the common myths and understood how overstimulation can disrupt our brain's natural balance. We then shifted our focus to the crucial balance between fleeting pleasures and enduring purpose, leaning how our values act as a compass for a truly fulfilling life. And finally, we discussed practical strategies to building behavioral control, taking breaks from unhelpful habits, sitting with discomfort through mindfulness, using sensory tools and consequential thinking to manage urges, as well as those app blocks, and actively replacing old patterns by building the new with value-aligned actions and self-compassion. I think if you can really take this in and implement it in some sort of way, it's going to have tremendous impact on your overall life. But just realize that you have the ability to change. You have the power of choice. It all starts with you. So Dr. Hronis states, the brain is an incredible organ and it can change. You have the knowledge and tools to consciously choose your path forward, finding a balance that feels right for you. So what I'm going to leave you with here is a couple call to actions. Do one, do them all, whatever you'd like. Let's start off by reflecting and identify. Take some time this week to reflect on your own daily habits. Can you identify at least one specific dopamine-driven behavior that you might want to change your relationship with, as discussed in the book? Again, you could pick up the book if you want to give a deeper dive into that. Then you also can discover your values. Consider taking the first step to identifying your core values. And I would like to say a fantastic free resource to help with this is the workbook that I have in the show notes, A Journey Towards Clarity. Definitely check it out. It's free. You might also use it. I think it's a really well created journal. I'm a little biased as I did create it myself, but definitely check it out. It's free and it can help you find those values, which will help you in this whole process. And then lastly, practice mindfulness and self-compassion. When you next face an urge or an uncomfortable emotion, try to ride the wave using mindfulness. Notice the sensations without judgment. And if you stumble, practice self-compassion. Don't beat yourself up for it. Just start again. So, where do you go if you want more information? Well, obviously, you can pick up this book, The Dopamine Brain by Anastasia Hronis. You can also check out more of her work with the Australian Institute for Human Wellness. And again, don't forget to check out that free workbook that I have in the show notes. Download it, work on it, and feel free to let me know how you go with it too. I'd be stoked if people actually completed the workbook and told me the benefit it's had in their life. But anyways, it's been lovely with you all this week. I hope you're taking some great information. We have some interviews coming up in the near future, so I'm looking forward to that. And again, definitely check back at least every 2 weeks, if not sooner, for our podcast. But thanks for tuning in. Look forward to future weeks with you.
Thanks for listening. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.